Hello, everyone, and welcome. And we are going to discuss today the Venezuelan Petro cryptocurrency that was just released on Tuesday of this past week. And we have, again, Pat here with you. So,
hello, everyone. Welcome, Crypto Live community.
Sorry that the phone's going off so much in the background there. I don't actually know what it is, but
Happy Hump Day.
Cheers. We're going to make it through the weekend. We're going to talk about some Petro, some Venezuelan Bolivar. They ditched the Bolivar this past week. They've moved on to a new bill called the Sovereign Bolivar, which is actually pegged to a cryptocurrency called the Petro. Now, some of you may remember the Petro from back in December when Venezuela initially announced that they were going to hold an ICO to raise money for this state-backed cryptocurrency. And what's his name?
President Nicolas Maduro.
Nicolas Maduro is the one spearheading this whole campaign, and it's absolutely crushing the economy of Venezuela. So we just want to review a few articles that we went over. We're going to have an open dialogue. If any of you guys want to make a comment on this live feed here, we'll try to answer your questions. But again, the main topic is going to be the Petro and the Venezuelan economic crisis surrounding the hyperinflation of their native currency. All right, guys, let's dig right in. So first off here, we were in an article on Wired that just got released a few hours ago. Inside the bluster of lies of Petro, Venezuela's cryptocurrency scam. So that's the title of the Wired article. And it just introduces the Petro. It's a new cryptocurrency sanctioned by Venezuela's government. And it's designed to boost the Bolivar. The Bolivar has had hyperinflation. It's been plagued. They're on pace to, I think it's 1,000,000% inflation this year alone. So think about that. These Venezuelans are so strapped from not having enough value in their money that they actually can't even buy food or groceries or supplies. They're just making purses out of the Bolivar. It's worthless. They're using it as toilet paper. So that gives you a sense of how valuable it actually is. So
over the weekend, in anticipation of launching the new Petro and what the new currency that Maduro is calling the Sovereign Bolivar, the government intentionally deflated their money by 95%. To knock 5 zeros off of what its current value is. So they are tying the Sovereign Bolivar directly to the Petro. They will have a fixed rate of the Petro. There will be 100 million in circulation.
100 million in circulation.
Tied directly to about 3,600 Sovereign Bolivars with an estimated value of one Petro being the equivalency of $60.
So exactly. So the Petro is pegged to a single barrel of Venezuelan oil produced by their government company here that runs the oil. So their government oil company, PDVSA, which is actually in $45 billion of debt. So think of that. They're pegging their national currency to barrels of oil that are theoretically produced or not being produced by a company in $45 billion of debt. That's awful. So first off, if these barrels of oil do even exist, they're technically owed as payment to the debt.
And that's also part of the issue as well, is that the Petro's value is supposed to be based on what Venezuela's crude oil reserves are. So crude oil reserves that are not in circulation are not sold, but just kept as a backer for their cryptocurrency. The problem with that is that, oil is a commodity, and Venezuela is not the only country that produces it, and they're still fixed to global prices and market valuations.
So, give you an idea of what the price of a Petro actually is. So they currently value it around $60. Well, that's not the price of a barrel of oil. The current price of a barrel of oil on, I think it's the NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange, is about $75 per barrel. Now, they do note here that the way they intend to value the Petro, again, it almost seems like they're valuing it like a mutual fund where they're going back on previous day's price and then they're giving it some sort of discount. So that almost reminds me of like the NAV on a mutual fund where it's struck at a certain time after the market closes. So the value of the Petro is found by using the previous day's price. They must have a spot price, and then they're discounting that a variable percentage or a variable amount. That's very suspicious. So you're actually not going to know the exact value of the Petro until Venezuela's government actually comes out and issues a price for that day. based on those metrics I just described, with that variable number in there, which is the discount. So, what is it? They're having a good day, so they don't discount it as much, or it's entirely up to in the hands of the government to price this cryptocurrency, it seems, or use this variable number in that pricing mechanism.
Here's another thing that's up in the hands of the government as well. So the Petro, from what Maduro claims, is going to be fixed at 100 million coins in circulation, tied directly one Petro to 3,600 bolivars. But given Venezuela's current economic crisis and at least their policies over the previous years that have led to their current crisis, who is to say that given the inflation that the government does not print more money?
So yes, that's important to note. So they ditched the previous bolivar and they replaced it with this sovereign bolivar. Again, 3,600 sovereign bolivars equals one petro equals roughly $60. So what's to say they're not keeping track of the total supply of sovereign bolivar? What if they print more of those? Well, theoretically, they're devaluing and still having inflation on that sovereign bolivar. Even if the cryptocurrency petro is still pegged somehow legitimately to the price of a barrel of oil, they still have the problem of printing sovereign bolivar. So they could still cause the initial issue of hyperinflation. So this is actually a roundabout method to give the illusion that the sovereign bolivar should equal, 3,600 sovereign bolivar to $60. So it's actually not the case. They could just print more of that sovereign bolivar, therefore devaluing it, causing the hyperinflation again. So this proposal here, well, it's great. Why couldn't they have just made the petro the national currency? Why do they have to have this secondary item, the sovereign bolivar, which is entirely in their control, off blockchain, where the supply cannot be tracked, and it's run by that central authority? So to me, it doesn't solve anything. It's an obvious scam. It is important to note so that 100 million supply is going to be on the NEM blockchain. So it's a token created on the NEM platform. If you don't know what NEM is, it's currently, I believe, the 17th ranked cryptocurrency on CoinMarketCap. And they're just a smart contracts platform where you can tokenize on them. Same with like what an Ethereum would be. You can tokenize on Ethereum. So apparently they've already raised 3.3 billion US dollar equivalency during this ICO phase. And apparently if you can find the website for this petro, you can still contribute funds to the ICO. But I wouldn't recommend that at all, since everything points to this being a scam and it's not actually being traded in any major cryptocurrency exchange.
Further, I wouldn't recommend that if you are a U.S. or European
No.
citizen, because the biggest thing that we, in
Exactly.
our initial discussions, is where we've only kind of talked about this as if the actions of the Venezuelan government and the bolivar is only going to affect Venezuela. So the main reason that Maduro is doing this is to try to subvert Western sanctions.
Sanctions, yes, it's a way to get away.
Primarily. And then again, one of the more important issues too in tying the petro to a barrel of oil is that Venezuela is not the only oil producer. There are 15 members of OPEC, all that have different interests. So while Venezuela may want to decrease oil production and hope for an increase in the price of a barrel of oil, there are plenty of other nations who don't.
But again, none of this really matters because they can just print more sovereign bolivar. That's the main point that I think everyone's missing in this whole scheme that they've outlined. They have this secondary asset, which is a paper money controlled by their central banks, which can be printed and not traced, similar to the current bolivar. Them saying that it's pegged to the price of a crypto asset, really means nothing for their ability to print that paper sovereign bolivar. So that's where I'm seeing a lot of concern. Any argument that's pro-petro, I'll stop you right at the point in saying that the sovereign bolivar has nothing to do with the actual petro, since it is centrally controlled and can be printed.
And on that point, so one of the more interesting things as far as why I find the petro to be such an interesting case study more than anything is that this is the first time that a state government is tying a cryptocurrency to their fiat currency directly. However, that also seems to be going against the entire intention of blockchain technology and why we love crypto so much to begin with. So crypto platforms are supposed to be decentralized, meaning that not one person or entity has control of the flow of money through the ledger. Secondly, One of the main reasons why we all love it so much is that there is no reason for a third party. It is a medium of exchange for peer-to-peer. That is not the case, either of those two, in the case of the Petro. It is state-controlled by a socialist government.
Right, you have Nicolas
Maduro,
who's the dictator, essentially, of Venezuela. It's just not a good thing when he's making the decisions here. So I want to just note that back in 2008, when Hugo Chavez was the leader of Venezuela, he pulled a similar stunt, not essentially pegging the price of their currency to a cryptocurrency. Wasn't really around back then. However, he did drop 3 zeros off of their Bolivar and rename it to Bolivar Future. So
he
similar tactic where they're dropping zeros off of their
very
bills.
similar tactic to hyperinflation. Obviously, anyone that studied Venezuela knows that Maduro was Chavez's right-hand man.
So it seems like he learned a lesson from Chavez. Unfortunately, it's a bad lesson, and it's an inaccurate lesson, and it's leading to the downfall of their economy. Which, by the way, the IMF, International Monetary Fund, projected that Venezuela's economy will shrink by 18% this year. So not only are they dealing with 1,000,000% of inflation, but they're also dealing with a real problem here with a shrinking economy, shrinking by 18%, as estimates say here. So production is less, and possibly, what could go worse for them than what's happening right now?
Well, I mean, honestly, you just feel for the Venezuelan people. You have a huge immigration crisis there where you have hundreds of thousands of migrants literally just fleeing their country because there's no stability, there's no economic prosperity, there's really no hope because Maduro's policies are continuing to fail. I largely believe that this is just, desperation from a desperate man. And again, the currency had been so hyperinflated to begin with because they just kept printing money and printing money. Who is to say that they don't print more sovereign bolivars, even though the price of the petro is fixed?
Right. So even if the petro turns out to be a successful, stable asset in the cryptocurrency space, which we highly doubt will ever happen, what's not to say that they can't just print more of this sovereign bolivar and inflate the price of that compared to the petro? But it's not being tracked, so how would you even keep track of this kind of stuff? It's very confusing.
Well, it's not only that. More importantly, it's not going to be oil will be affected by traditional markets, which should, either increase or decrease the price of the petro. But again, it's outside of what a price of a barrel of oil is. That's really the only market factors that are going to have any kind of play on what the petro is anyways, because this is a state-controlled currency.
And they don't really outline, they have a shady white paper as it is. I couldn't find the white paper when I looked for it, but I guess it was out there at one point, maybe back in December before it was pulled from the internet. Possibly they would have outlined how to actually redeem a barrel of oil from holding a petro. If I'm a Venezuelan citizen, or if I'm in a country, let's say I'm Russia and I want to deal with Venezuela and buy their oil, what do I do? Do I just, transfer the petro to Nicolas Maduro himself and then hope that the barrels of oil end up in my port the next week? Well, what's the official process? They don't really outline that.
Unfortunately, I have to interrupt you here for a moment, as you're getting a little too tied up on the price of oil. So the petro is supposed to be, in principle, from what Maduro is telling his people and telling the world, it is supposed to be tied to their crude reserves. Very similar to, back when we were on the gold standard, the concept that a dollar actually had a physical species backing it. Now, we all know that's not to be true. And we all, at least from current political crises, can understand that Maduro, to a large extent, most likely cannot be trusted. So who is to say that there's even the crude reserves to back up the claims of the 100 million petros to begin with?
No, and certainly I would think that some sort of stoppage needs to be placed on their ICO sale if it is still ongoing. From what I see here in the reports, over 133 countries were interested, according to Maduro. Who knows if that's a made-up stat, including countries like Russia and China.
Well, primarily his ICO numbers as well. His claims that he's raised about $3.3 billion.
Well, imagine if you could actually buy a barrel of oil for $60 using the petro from Venezuela and then go ahead and, sell it on the futures market at $75 immediately. That's a huge arbitrage profit opportunity there. So I'm sure that's why this is gaining any sort of interest. When it is all said and done, Venezuela does have oil reserves, an oil-rich country. I think they're actually one of the most concentrated countries in terms of holding oil in the world. So other countries, of course, are going to be greedy and try to find ways to get that oil from them at a discount. And it may just have to be they have to play ball with Maduro here using the petro.
But once again, one of the problems with tying it to just to one commodity and not diversifying it either is that, Venezuela is not the only oil producing nation. Yes, they are a member of OPEC. OPEC has 14 other member states. Oh, not including the United States, which is the largest producer of oil in the world.
I just want to say here, in 1920, Germany, this is somewhat comparable, not really comparable to what's going on in Venezuela, but when Germany had a hyperinflation problem, what they did was they pegged their national currency to mortgages on properties that conducted business or agriculture. So it stabilized their currency and stopped the hyperinflation, but this may have been because the citizens could understand the fact that property held value and they understood the mortgage financial instrument. So this is entirely different than what we're having today, but that's just a past example that we see from a pegged national currency that actually stopped hyperinflation.
From a socialist, borderline fascist government.
Of course it was, yeah, not doubting that. So again here we have 100 million petro to be in circulation, but there is no evidence on any block explorers that I could find that show the petro. So if you go on NEM's block explorer, you should be able to find the petro. So if it's a case where there is no actual token and they're just taking in Bitcoin and Ethereum, that would be a shame because, by their reports, they say they've already raised $3.3 billion. This would be the largest ICO heist in history if that was the case. If they do actually issue these tokens on NEM, holy cow, I'm sure they'll find their way onto, decentralized exchanges or exchanges outside of just the Venezuelan government. That's just the way things seem to operate here in cryptocurrency. Any token can end up on a decentralized exchange.
Well, it also seemed to be the only way that the petro would actually have any value is because it would have to be distributed within the international community.
Right.
It has to be sold outside of Venezuela because Venezuela itself does not have the investment for it. And more importantly, I don't necessarily know if their people have the confidence in both either the petro nor Maduro.
No, they don't. Everyone that is in Venezuela wants to leave Venezuela. Over 400,000 people have fled the country to neighboring countries within the past few months here.
And I believe, what was it today? So there was a workers' strike held by the opposition politician Andres Velasquez, who estimated that some close to 60% of private sector workers took today off in opposition.
So Andres Velasquez could be a name that you hear more in the media because he's the opposition party here. He is the guy sort of leading the uprising of the people, helping with the workers' strike, or at least seeming to be the head of that workers' strike, where 60% of them did go on strike.
Just to temper your expectations there, Kenny, you are also talking about a government that has been murdering its own people.
Right, so I almost feel scared to keep reporting on the topic now that you say that. But thankfully, we're here in the USA where we are protected by good old Uncle Sam and our president, I guess. That's a different issue. But another stat here. So mining Bitcoin in Venezuela is actually legal and can put you in jail. So they're pegging their national currency to a cryptocurrency of their own, but mining Bitcoin, the number one cryptocurrency, lands you in jail. So seems like they're trying to pull a fast one on their citizens. Again, this is really awful, considering that a lot of the citizens are not able to have basic necessities, food, supplies, clothing, because they are dealing with that issue of hyperinflation being taken advantage of by their government. So when will the world step in and put a stop to this? Who knows? Any speculation on that?
Well, the world is trying to, which is why their government is sanctioned in the first place.
Right.
However, the real losers here obviously are the Venezuelan people. Largely in our review of the petro, I think that this is probably nothing more than just a money grab, largely because Maduro does not, in Venezuela in general, in their treasuries, do not really have any solvent liquidity. So in launching, at the time they launched this ICO, it was in December. The market was as high as it had ever been, largely just based out of speculation, which is why, they created an ICO to begin with is because they didn't want to lose out on the opportunity to try to fleece people and add to their reserves.
Let's be real, people. If the Venezuelan government was really trying to adopt cryptocurrency for the betterment of its economy, it would have just adopted Bitcoin. The number one cryptocurrency. It's a way to still avoid sanctions, which they apparently want to do, but it is actually backed by history. We have, almost 10 years of trading on Bitcoin. It has, $10 billion in daily volume. It's an actual asset that people are considering in the real financial markets. The Petro is never going to make it to a central controlled exchange. American investors are banned from investing in it or buying or trading it. It's just a disaster written all over it.
Which is also, again, part of the design, which is why it is a state-controlled cryptocurrency. It runs counter to why we invest in crypto to begin with.
So hope you guys have learned a lot from this here video. And again, please stay away from the Petro. We do not recommend it, although we are not financial advisors and we have no legal opinions. We just really want you to be aware of the scam that's going on in Venezuela and the struggle of the hyperinflation and economic crisis.
And furthermore, if you are a U.S. or European citizen, do not under any circumstances purchase the Petro, or there may be serious legal ramifications for you.
All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed. Until next time, take care.